Tonight, we begin with numbers. Numbers that are stark, numbers that are heavy. Russia says it has handed over the remains of 1,000 soldiers to Ukraine. 1,000 remains returned. In exchange, Russia says it has received the bodies of 35 Russian soldiers, 35, two figures placed side by side, 1,000 and 35. The exchange of remains is not symbolic, it is not abstract, it is physical, it is procedural, it is the movement of bodies across lines shaped by war. Russia describes this as a handover, a transfer of remains to Ukraine, and a receipt of 35 of its own soldiers in return. This development unfolds as the war has entered its fifth year, 5 years, a conflict that has continued long enough for entire seasons to cycle again and again, long enough for negotiations to begin, pause, resume, long enough for reconstruction plans to be discussed even as fighting persists. At the same time as this exchange, Ukraine's chief negotiator met envoys of U.S. President Donald Trump in Geneva. The meeting focused on economic plans for the reconstruction of Ukraine after the war. Reconstruction, a word that points forward, a word that implies rebuilding, a word that suggests what comes after. Yet the exchange of remains underscores what has already occurred: loss, scale, casualties. The Geneva meeting did not stand alone. Negotiators were also preparing a third round of U.S.-led talks aimed at ending the conflict, a trilateral meeting involving the Russian side as well. Third round, not the first attempt, not the second, a third effort in a continuing series. The conflict has entered its fifth year. That time frame shapes everything. It frames the urgency of reconstruction plans. It frames the need for negotiations. It frames the weight of exchanges like this one. And it frames what happened hours before the Geneva talks. Russia launched 420 drones and 39 missiles. 420 drones, 39 missiles launched in 6 different regions of Ukraine. 6 regions. That detail underscores the geographic spread, the reach, the scale. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said dozens of people were injured, dozens. Injuries reported across those regions. The launches came hours before the Geneva discussions, hours before negotiators gathered to talk about reconstruction, hours before preparations for a third round of U.S.-led talks. The sequence matters: an exchange of remains, a meeting in Geneva, preparations for trilateral talks, and just hours earlier, a wave of drones and missiles. The numbers sit side by side. 1,000 remains handed over, 35 bodies received, 420 drones launched, 39 missiles fired, 6 regions struck, dozens injured. Each number representing lives, each number marking impact. The exchange of remains signals coordination at a procedural level. The negotiations in Geneva signal diplomatic engagement. The launches of drones and missiles signal continued military action, all of it unfolding within the same window of time. The war has entered its 5th year. That fact shapes context. It reminds us that this is not a new conflict. It has endured. It has stretched across years. It has seen multiple rounds of talks. It has seen exchanges of remains. It has seen reconstruction discussions begin even before fighting ends. The meeting in Geneva focused on economic plans for reconstruction after the war. After the war. That phrasing looks beyond the present. Yet the present includes drone launches and missile strikes. The present includes exchanges of bodies. The present includes preparation for a third round of U.S.-led talks aimed at ending the conflict, a trilateral meeting involving the Russian side as well. Negotiation continues, fighting continues, loss continues. One short sentence seems to capture the gravity. Every number is someone. It does not add information. It does not interpret. It simply reflects the human weight behind figures. 1,000 remains, 35 bodies, 420 drones, 39 missiles, dozens injured, 6 regions, 5 years of conflict. Russia says it handed over the remains of 1,000 soldiers to Ukraine. It says it received 35 Russian soldiers in return. Ukraine's chief negotiator met envoys of U.S. President Donald Trump in Geneva to discuss reconstruction plans. Negotiators were preparing a third round of U.S.-led talks aimed at ending the conflict. Hours before those talks, Russia launched hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles across multiple regions. President Zelensky reported dozens of injuries. These developments do not exist in isolation. They occur within the same stretch of time. An exchange of remains alongside preparations for negotiation, reconstruction discussions alongside continued strikes, diplomatic engagement alongside military action. That is where we begin. Numbers, meetings, missiles, and a conflict now in its fifth year. As the exchange of remains unfolded, attention also turned to Geneva. There, Ukraine's chief negotiator met envoys of U.S. President Donald Trump. The focus of that meeting was economic planning, specifically plans for the reconstruction of Ukraine after the war. Reconstruction is a forward-looking term. It assumes an endpoint. It assumes a phase beyond active conflict. It assumes rebuilding, infrastructure restored, economies restarted, communities repaired. The meeting in Geneva centered on those economic plans. It did not stand in isolation. Negotiators were also preparing a third round of U.S.-led talks aimed at ending the conflict. Third round. That detail signals continuity. It signals persistence. It signals that prior efforts have taken place. This upcoming meeting is described as trilateral. It involves the Russian side as well. 3 parties at the table, U.S.-led, with Ukraine, with Russia. The conflict has now entered its 5th year. 5 years of sustained war, 5 years of shifting fronts, 5 years of casualties, 5 years of negotiation attempts. Within that context, reconstruction plans take on a different tone. They represent anticipation. They represent planning for stability, even as instability continues. The meeting between Ukraine's chief negotiator and President Trump's envoys in Geneva was focused on economic plans. That focus is specific: economic reconstruction after the war. Those words point forward. They imply preparation. They imply coordination. They imply engagement between Ukraine and the United States. At the same time, negotiators were preparing for the third round of U.S.-led talks, talks aimed at ending the conflict. That phrasing is precise: aimed at ending the conflict. The goal is clear. The outcome is not yet achieved. Preparation indicates that discussions are scheduled, structured, organized. The involvement of the Russian side in the trilateral meeting underscores the complexity. This is not a bilateral conversation. It includes 3 parties. It acknowledges that resolution requires multiple actors. The timing of these diplomatic efforts is notable. They come as the war has entered its 5th year. 5 years since the conflict began, 5 years of loss and displacement, 5 years of military campaigns and counter-campaigns, 5 years of international involvement. Reconstruction discussions during an ongoing conflict create a layered moment, planning for after, while events continue now. The Geneva meeting focused on economic plans for rebuilding Ukraine. The language is specific: economic plans, reconstruction after the war. It signals strategic thinking beyond immediate hostilities. It signals collaboration with U.S. envoys. It signals preparation for a post-war phase. At the same time, negotiators were preparing for another round of talks, a third round, U.S.-led, aimed at ending the conflict. The sequence suggests persistence in diplomacy, not abandonment, not pause. Preparation continues, even in the 5th year. One short line captures the tone of this moment. Talks continue. It is understated. It is factual. It reflects ongoing effort. Diplomacy has not stopped. Meetings are being held. Plans are being discussed. Rounds of talks are being prepared. The Geneva setting underscores international engagement, a neutral venue, a location associated with negotiation. Ukraine's chief negotiator meeting U.S. envoys, discussing economic plans, while a third round of broader talks is being readied. This diplomatic activity unfolds against a backdrop of continued military action. The conflict has not paused for discussion. It has entered its 5th year. That time frame shapes urgency. It shapes exhaustion. It shapes the need for both immediate action and long-term planning. The reconstruction discussions focus on what comes after the war, but the war is ongoing. Negotiators are preparing for talks aimed at ending it. The involvement of the Russian side in the trilateral meeting is explicit. This is not a conversation about Russia. It is a conversation with Russia. The structure of the talks matters. U.S.-led, trilateral, aimed at ending the conflict. Preparation indicates scheduled engagement. It indicates organization. It indicates a pathway being pursued. The exchange of remains described earlier reflects the human cost of 5 years. The Geneva meeting reflects the political and economic response to those years. The preparation for a third round of talks reflects ongoing attempts at resolution. Each element exists within the same window of time. Remains handed over, Economic plans discussed, talks prepared, the war in its fifth year. The Geneva meeting did not occur in isolation from events on the ground. Hours before those discussions, military actions took place, but in this moment, the focus remains on diplomacy, on negotiation, on reconstruction, on ending the conflict. 5 years in, that duration shapes perspective. It shapes planning. It shapes urgency. It shapes the weight of each meeting, each round of talks, each exchange. 5 years. That phrase stands alone. It does not interpret, it simply marks time. The meeting between Ukraine's chief negotiator and President Trump's envoys in Geneva addressed economic plans for rebuilding after the war. Negotiators were preparing for a third U.S.-led round of talks involving Russia, all of it set against a conflict that has now entered its fifth year. Diplomacy continues, preparation continues, planning continues, even as the war does too. Hours before the Geneva talks, hours before negotiators gathered to discuss reconstruction, hours before preparations for a third round of U.S.-led talks, military action unfolded. Russia launched 420 drones and 39 missiles. 420 drones, 39 missiles, launched in 6 different regions of Ukraine, 6 regions, a spread that signals range, a distribution that signals coordination. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said dozens of people were injured. Dozens. Not a single location, not a single strike, multiple regions, multiple impacts. This came just hours before diplomatic discussions in Geneva. The timing creates contrast. On one side, negotiators preparing for talks aimed at ending the conflict. On the other, hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles launched across Ukraine. The conflict has entered its fifth year. 5 years in, military activity continues. 5 years in, exchanges of remains occur. 5 years in, reconstruction plans are discussed. And 5 years in, hundreds of drones and missiles are launched in a single wave. President Zelensky's statement places the number of injured in the dozens. That figure represents people affected across 6 regions. The launch of 420 drones and 39 missiles underscores scale. It underscores intensity. It underscores continued hostilities. These strikes occurred before the Geneva talks. Before the meeting between Ukraine's chief negotiator and envoys of U.S. President Donald Trump, before negotiators prepared for a third U.S.-led round of talks involving Russia, the sequence is clear: strikes, injuries, then talks. Diplomatic engagement continues even as military operations proceed. Russia says it handed over the remains of 1,000 soldiers to Ukraine. It says it received 35 Russian soldiers in return. Those exchanges happened within the same broader time frame. Remains transferred, drones launched, missiles fired, negotiators meeting, talks prepared, all within a conflict now 5 years old. The launch of 420 drones and 39 missiles is not described as isolated. It is described as occurring across 6 regions: geographic breadth, coordinated action, impact in multiple areas. President Zelensky said dozens were injured. That number speaks to human consequence. Behind the drones, behind the missiles, behind the numbers, people, communities, regions affected. A brief line captures the weight. The war has not paused. It is factual. It reflects the continuity of military action even amid diplomacy. The Geneva meeting focused on economic plans for reconstruction after the war. But before those discussions, drones and missiles were launched. Negotiators were preparing a third round of U.S.-led talks aimed at ending the conflict. But before that round, strikes occurred across 6 regions. The exchange of remains underscores the human cost accumulated over 5 years. The drone and missile launches underscore the ongoing cost. The diplomatic meetings underscore attempts to shape what comes next. All of it exists within the same frame. 5 years into the conflict, Russia launching 420 drones and 39 missiles. Ukraine reporting dozens injured. Russia handing over 1,000 remains, receiving 35 in return. Ukraine's chief negotiator meeting U.S. envoys in Geneva, preparing for a trilateral U.S.-led third round of talks. The numbers remain: 420 drones, 39 missiles, 6 regions, dozens injured, 1,000 remains returned, 35 bodies received, 5 years of conflict. These are not abstract statistics. They define this moment. Military action and diplomacy unfolding almost simultaneously. Reconstruction plans discussed even as new damage occurs. Talks prepared even as strikes are launched. The war has entered its 5th year. That duration frames everything. It frames the scale of exchanges. It frames the persistence of military campaigns. It frames the urgency of negotiations, and it frames the timing of events that unfold within hours of one another. President Zelensky's statement about dozens injured places the human dimension alongside the military figures. Drones and missiles are counted, so are injuries. Remains are counted, so are years. The Geneva talks and preparations for a third U.S.-led round aim to end the conflict, yet the conflict continues. Military action persists. Exchanges of remains continue. Diplomatic meetings continue, all at once. Another short sentence lingers. Both are happening. Strikes and talks, exchanges and negotiations, reconstruction plans and active launches. The war, now in its 5th year, contains all of these elements. Russia says it handed over 1,000 soldiers' remains and received 35 in return. Ukraine's chief negotiator met U.S. envoys in Geneva to discuss economic plans for reconstruction. Negotiators prepared for a third round of U.S.-led talks involving Russia. Hours before those discussions, Russia launched 420 drones and 39 missiles across 6 regions. President Zelensky reported dozens injured. These are the facts as presented. They unfold within the same stretch of time. They define this moment, a moment marked by numbers, by meetings, by missiles, by remains, and by a conflict now 5 years old.